And joining me this week, it's my extreme honor to welcome Stephen Aaron Gray. Stephen Aaron Gray is a leading libertarian spokesman, tech activist, and the author of the new book, Ant Farm, a novel about what's bugging society. This is a great book. I started reading this last week. Again, it's Ant Farm, a novel about what's bugging society. Stephen Aaron Gray is passionate about liberty, having traveled the globe as an internationally acclaimed DJ under the stage name Freaky Flow. He has come to recognize that freedom works and control does not. A tribute to a George Orwell classic and simultaneously a nod to those who pursue liberty across the globe, Gray's Ant Farm expresses these ideas in a creative narrative that anyone can easily understand. With an academic history focused on world religions to boot, Gray possesses an added cultural sensitivity, which contributes to the universal impact of the philosophies that he holds so dear. It's no wonder that many are already calling Ant Farm a new classic. Stephen Aaron Gray, welcome to the Bruce Collins Show.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Well, it's great to have you on. Now, before we get to your book, as we said in the intro, you are DJ Freaky Flow. How did you get the name Freaky Flow?
You know, that's an old story because I've been DJing about 21 years now. So definitely more people know the name Freaky Flow than people know the name Stephen Aaron Gray. But it comes from a lyric in a hip hop song I used to like, and I do a lot of scratching when I DJ. I still play on vinyl, and so back at the time, this is part of the story at least, I thought, okay, well my name, if I use the words Freaky Flow as my DJ name, that's already on a record. That means I can scratch with my name at shows and sort of announce who I am without having to say a word with my own voice.
Now, when I was a kid, I was known as Sir Farts-a-Lot, but it had nothing to do with hip-hop. And I won't go into detail. Now, you've traveled all over the world, as we said, as DJ Freaky Flow. From a libertarian perspective, how did your experiences overseas shape or maybe reinforce your opinions?
I would say they certainly shaped it because I didn't have very strong opinions when I first started DJing. So, I started developing these opinions as I traveled and as I read more. And like you were saying in the introduction there, I started to notice that freedom works and control doesn't. Or in other words, I found that places that had sort of more heavy controls on people that lived there tended to enjoy less prosperity and more problems, and places where people were not as restricted tended to be happier, more prosperous places. And so that's sort of what I've come to learn in my travels.
Mm-hmm. Now, your book, as we said before, is Ant Farm. And so far, what I've read, I like it. It's a great book. Now, what is this book about?
Well, the way I've been describing it to people in a nutshell is it's a fictional but familiar story about a free society that deteriorates into a totalitarian society. And the characters, it's a metaphor. The characters are all insects, ants, and the villains are cockroaches. So I've sort of borrowed a page from George Orwell with his book Animal Farm in relaying a philosophy to people, to the masses, in a metaphoric way that will be hopefully easy to digest. I try not to get too complicated conceptually. There's no Latin words. It's not a heavy data-filled book. It's a novel. It's fiction. And so that's what it's really about.
Strangely enough, George Orwell, we look at his work, 1984 was one of his books, and of course that became a movie a couple times. But it's so amazing how he was able to predict the future. How do you think he was able to look ahead into the future and see these? I mean, obviously not everything has come to pass yet, but it seems like we're going in that direction. How was he able to do that?
It's really difficult for me to guess at it without actually having ever spoken to the man. But all I can say is that you look at history, and that's often a good indicator for how things are going to go in the future. So I would guess that he probably saw some signs of a totalitarian state back in his day, and he imagined that if these things don't change, that 1984 is where we're headed in many ways, shapes, and forms, and he was right. And in that same way, there's sort of a timeline. If you want to look at a timeline from freedom to total state control, and right now we're somewhere in the middle, and depending on who you ask, we're either further along or less far along on that timeline. But my book Ant Farm presents a whole timeline from freedom to totalitarianism, and if you look at any one point and then you read ahead further in the book, I think it's a good indicator of also where we may be headed if things don't change.
Yeah. I got into conspiracy theory pretty heavily about 8 years ago, and I've sort of pulled back a little bit from that because I think some of it is sensationalism. Yet, if you look at some of the elites, what we'll call elites in society, they have written about controlling society. So are we heading towards this totalitarian state out of stupidity of our politicians and leaders, or do you think there's something orchestrated going on?
I don't think it's some grandmaster Illuminati covert plan. I do think it's just in the nature of humans to want to control things, and it's not always with ill intent. A lot of times people get into power and they think, I can save more people or I can help society by implementing these controls, and then they start to get drunk on their own power, and they don't realize that even if things aren't going right, they still want to continue with those measures. And so I think it's just human nature a lot of times for certain people to want to control other people in a way that they see best.
Mm-hmm. Now, net neutrality, this is a term that we're hearing quite a bit lately. It's defined as a principle that Internet service providers and governments should treat all data on the Internet equally, not discriminating or charging differentially. But what does net neutrality mean for the average American?
Well, yeah, I happen to think that even the term net neutrality is misleading. It's not really the right term. I think a more accurate term that everybody ought to be calling it is government price controls of the Internet, because that's what it really is. It's the government trying to tell service providers, here's what you can and cannot charge for Internet service. If there was some new law passed that from now on McDonald's has to charge you the same amount of money if you order 1 Big Mac or 20, I don't think we'd call that food neutrality. But that's exactly what this is akin to. And so to the average person, it may sound really good because you hear, oh, wow, no matter how much activity I do online, no matter how many videos I watch, it's going to be the same price no matter what. So that sounds good when you first hear it, but when you explore it a little further, anytime the government fixes pricing on anything, the results usually turn pretty disastrous.
Mm-hmm. Now, who would be in charge of controlling the Internet? Is it the FCC?
It would likely be the FCC, but as most people know, government policy is influenced by lobbyists. And so probably whoever's going to financially profit from this kind of thing the most is going to have a lot of sway in these decisions.
And so the Internet, obviously there are good things on the Internet and arguably bad things on the Internet. But the Internet's been the great equalizer and a huge opportunity for the small businessman or woman who could not afford a brick and mortar store. I sold pro wrestling T-shirts back in the 90s and made a pretty good profit back then. What would this be for small businesses and entrepreneurs?
Well, this could mean in the beginning that no matter how much activity you do online, you're going to be paying a lower price. But down the road, who knows how that's going to go? Because once the government gets its fingers into controlling anything, it always expands. So right now, maybe it's just pricing, but down the road, who knows? Maybe it turns into something where they're going to charge more for certain content. You just can never say for sure. So it's a scary prospect that I think we really ought to avoid. I think the other point to make is that this is really a problem that was caused by the state in the first place, and now the state is coming in and trying to create a solution for a problem they created, and I'll explain a little bit more. It is a real problem that internet pricing is high, and if the companies have their way, they're going to try and charge you more if you want to watch Netflix a lot or YouTube a lot. But that problem comes about because in any geographic region, the state has appointed one or two service providers that are allowed to provide service to people. In other words, they've essentially given these blanket privileges to a couple of companies and forbidden any other companies from operating in the area, creating a monopoly or an oligopoly. And instead of these net neutrality, so-called net neutrality laws that are being passed or proposed, which, as you've heard, I've called more accurately government control over internet pricing, instead of doing that, all that the state has to do is lift these initial regulations and let other internet service provider companies operate in the geographic regions, because once they do that, as everybody knows, when there's more competition, prices go down, service quality goes up, and so we wouldn't even need to be having this discussion if the government didn't create the problem in the first place.
Absolutely. And I understand the public is not for this either. There's 61% are against this. Yeah,
that's true. I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask. 61% is still just, a little more than half. So that means that there's a lot of people supporting it too. And I think a lot of people that support it and a lot of people that don't support it don't know all the intricacies of everything. I think most people don't understand that this is a government-created problem in the first place. And so those that support so-called net neutrality are really looking at the wrong core issue.
Yeah. Where do you stand on the whole issue with Michael Brown and Eric Garner and seeing it through the lens of police brutality? Do you think that was true of both of those cases?
Well, first of all, they're two different cases. So let's look first at the Brown case, where there's not even any video footage of anything, whereas the Garner one there is. So first you look at the Brown one, and you hear differing testimony from a number of different witnesses, and it's hard to say for certain if the police officer, Darren Wilson, was acting in self-defense or not. And so I don't really know the answer to that question, but I'll tell you from all the stories I've read about other crooked police officers over the years, I tend to lead on the side of the fact that he probably acted in a way that was inappropriate. But again, I can't say for sure. Unfortunately, there's not enough evidence to support one way or the other. But I will tell you this. I think if it was anybody else that was not a cop in that situation, there would have at least been an indictment. And so in that way, I think there should have at least been an indictment so that more evidence could come out in the courtroom. I feel like too often police officers get special privileges that wouldn't be afforded to you or I because we're not cops. And I think jumping now to the Eric Garner case, that's certainly perfectly clear. I think that one is a much clearer case of police acting inappropriately, killing a person, and I think definitely if it was you or I that did that kind of thing, we certainly would have been indicted at least. And so that's why these lacking of indictments really trouble me, and it should be a cause for alarm for most decent people, I think.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I was recently talking to a libertarian and someone who was a member of the Ayn Rand Institute for a while, and I was asking them about anarchists and if they had a place in the Libertarian Party and what Ayn Rand would think of them, and he said she would have been against them. And you notice in some of these rioting and looting, they're the ones tearing up the neighborhood, the businesses. What do you think of anarchists in terms of being members in the Libertarian Party?
Well, I think, first of all, the term anarchist really is a bad one because it means different things to different people. To your average person, you hear the word anarchist and you think of somebody running around with Molotov cocktails and setting buildings on fire and somebody wanting no rules at all. But some people that are anarchists will call themselves actually anarcho-capitalists. And those people will say, we're not for no rules and we're not for no violence. In fact, we very much value order and rules. We just think that the rules should be decided upon by property owners, by private property owners. And I tend to more agree with those people, but even that term anarcho-capitalist I still think is a bad one. I think, just saying you're in favor of liberty can really convey that kind of thing without having to bring in these weird words like anarchy that really give people the wrong idea. And so I think that really is the only true form of liberty, is to be against state control of anything and rather to be in favor of private individuals getting to set their own rules on their own property, and order naturally ensues, and there's very little chaos. In fact, I would venture to say there'd be far less chaos in the world than there is currently.
I'm sort of a conservatarian, part conservative, part libertarian, and I was a huge Ron Paul supporter in 2008 and 2012. Was able to meet him and all of that. And how can libertarians, though, become a bigger part of the general elections? How can they become part of the presidential elections when they're sort of, censored from joining in the debates and all of that? How will libertarians be able to capture the vote in 2016?
The short answer is I don't think they will be able to, unfortunately. And that sounds awfully pessimistic of me, but I think it's also realistic. And instead, I think people that are in favor of liberty should be aspiring for different things other than running for federal political office, because I think that's sort of a lost cause. It's going to be difficult, and I think that there are other ways to be more productive, like spreading information about liberty and trying to convince their peers that freedom is a much better way than trying to control people. And also, there are sort of decentralized, more concentrated movements of people that are pro-liberty. And I think when you're a sort of a smaller group of people in an area with a smaller population, you're going to be much more effective than if you're trying to make a small splash in a giant pond. And certainly one positive area that I'm always reminded of is all of these people moving to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project. To me, that's really the most promising effort for liberty that I see currently happening, and they're having a real effect out there because, like I was saying, the population of New Hampshire is small. They're trying to get 20,000 liberty-loving people to move there, and a number like 20,000 people in a state as small as New Hampshire can make a real impact, especially when you compare it to a number of pro-liberty people trying to make an impact in the political sphere in a population of 300 plus million. That's way more difficult.
Absolutely. Now, how did you feel about, I know libertarians and Ron Paul, someone I admire, was for immigration and also a path to amnesty for many illegal aliens in the country currently. How did you feel about President Obama's actions with illegal immigrants and amnesty, or as I call it, Alien Ant Farm?
There you go. There is a band called Alien Ant Farm, I believe. They did a cover of Michael Jackson's song. Yeah, they did. What's the song called? Smooth Criminal, like a punk rock version of it. Anyway, back to your question though. I'm generally in favor, like I was saying, of no state control over anything, including property. And if the state doesn't control property, that means you and I control our own property, and therefore you and I should get to decide who is and who is not allowed on our property. And for some third party to stick their nose in your business or my business and tell you, hey, Mexican people that haven't jumped through our hoops aren't allowed on your property, or for somebody to come up to me and tell me, hey, Korean people that haven't jumped through our government hoops aren't allowed on your property, that's absurd. I think I should get to make that decision. I think you should get to make that decision, and therefore the state should have no part in it. And so therefore, I'm certainly in favor of any measure that allows anyone from anywhere in the world coming to property that's owned by other people. So, if Obama has started to go down that path, I certainly support it. I just don't know if he's doing it for the same reasons that I favor. But at the end of the day, the reasons don't matter. The end results matter. If people are free to go on land that they want, so long as the property owners are okay with it, I can only see that as a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Are libertarians already eyeing a candidate for 2016? And even though he's partially conservative and partially libertarian, could pure libertarians get behind a candidate like Rand Paul?
Well, before I answer that, let me just address the terminology of pure libertarians, because I tend to not even call myself a libertarian, and the reason for that is the word libertarian means different things to different people, as I'm sure you've noticed, and probably your listeners have noticed too. Somebody may call themselves a libertarian and be in favor of foreign wars, and other people may call themselves libertarians and not be in favor of foreign wars. So I prefer to say I'm generally pro-liberty rather than a libertarian, but I apologize for the sirens in the background. That's Los Angeles for you. But
you're not looting, are you?
I'm sorry?
You're not looting, are you?
Well, I guess I can't really say, right? I can't admit it. No, of course I'm not looting. I would never incriminate myself on a radio interview. But yeah. So that being said, it's hard to say if the pro-liberty community is really going to get behind any particular candidate for the next general election. A lot of people are liking what Rand Paul has to say, but a lot of people don't. Frankly, I don't agree with everything he says. I think he's less of a libertarian, less of a liberty-oriented candidate than his father was. And there's a lot of things that a lot of policies he supports that would make it impossible for me to vote for him unless he changes how he feels about things. And I guess we'll see how that goes.
Excellent. Now, where are you on the internet? Where can people find you and find more about you and maybe your book?
Yeah, I would say the easiest way is just to go to antfarmbook.com. If you go there, it actually redirects to my author website, StephenAaronGray.com, but antfarmbook.com is easier to remember. And so if they go there, people can download the first 4 chapters of my Ant Farm book completely for free, and then decide based on the merits of those first 4 chapters if they want to go ahead and purchase the rest of it.
Last question, and this is totally, totally a sidebar. When you scratch those records, are they permanently destroyed? Because when I used to scratch vinyl, I ruined them.
Well, it depends, right? If you're scratching as part of the music, like DJ battle scratching styles, you're not moving the needle across the vinyl. You're scratching in the groove of the record, and so that maybe creates very minuscule damage to the record. But certainly, if you do it over and over and over again, several hundred times on the exact same spot on the record, you're going to start to notice that the sound quality sort of fades out at those parts. But overall, it doesn't really affect quality. And even if it does, if it's something that enhances my DJ sets, I'm still all for it.
The book is Ant Farm, a novel about what's bugging society. The author is Stephen Aaron Gray, and I've had the privilege of interviewing Stephen Aaron Gray this week. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us this week, and I hope you can join us again sometime.
Oh, I would love to, and thank you so much for having me on.